They say the bravest warriors never chose the battlefield. They were dragged to it by pain, by purpose, or by God Himself. My name is lost to time, but my story, you've heard echoes of it in every tale of courage you didn't understand. Because what happened to me didn't start with strength. It started with silence. It was in the middle of the night, when the sky itself refused to shine, that I first heard Him, not with my ears, but in the space between breaths, in the tension between fear and obedience. "Get up," He said. I thought I was dreaming, until the ground trembled under my feet, and I realized the voice wasn't coming from around me, it was coming from within me. I wasn't a soldier, I wasn't a prophet. I was a broken man hiding behind excuses, behind routine, behind the armor of doubt I'd worn since childhood. And yet, He still called me warrior. I remember standing on that hill, the valley stretched out before me like a grave waiting to be filled, and across it, thousands, not metaphorical enemies, real ones, steel in their hands, hatred in their eyes, and me, holding nothing but the weight of a command I didn't ask for. People think chosen means qualified. It doesn't. Chosen means surrendered. It means you said yes when every part of you screamed run. And that's exactly what I wanted to do, run, but I couldn't. Because behind me were the people I loved, and they were watching. They didn't believe in me. Not yet. But they needed someone to believe in God for them. So I stepped forward, not because I had no fear, but because I feared what would happen if I didn't. The storm had passed, but the land still wept. Charred earth smoked where the battle had raged. Bodies lay still, their silence louder than the war cries that had echoed just hours before. And in the center of the devastation He stood, still breathing, barely. His name was Ezra, His armor cracked, His knees trembling, His sword no longer in His hand, but buried deep in the ground where He had driven it in His final plea to heaven. "If you are still with me, show me." No answer had come that night, but now the wind had shifted. He looked up. The horizon shimmered not with sunlight, but with something deeper, more eternal. There was a stillness that felt alive, as if the air itself waited to speak. Ezra fell to his knees again, this time not from exhaustion, but reverence. He didn't understand how he had survived. He didn't know how he had faced an army of thousands and lived, but he remembered the whisper, one no one else had heard, that had come just before the sky had split. "I will go before you." It hadn't come from the earth. It hadn't come from within. It had come from fire. Now in the quiet he heard it again, not in thunder, not in flames, but in the stillness. "You were never meant to win in your strength." Ezra's lips trembled. His heart pounded against his ribs. "You were meant to stand, and I would do the rest." And just like that, his knees no longer buckled. The memory returned. How he had stood when every other man ran. How the enemy had encircled him. How he had lifted his voice and declared, "I may fall today, but I will fall with the name of the living God in my mouth." And the ground had shaken, not with horses, not with chariots, but with presence. He had been chosen, but not because he was strong. He had been chosen because he was willing. In the days that followed, Ezra wandered, not out of confusion, but out of calling. He wasn't seeking to lead. He was seeking to obey. Villages whispered of the man who stood alone. Some said he was a prophet, others an angel in disguise. But Ezra knew he was neither. He was dust, made holy only by the one who breathed into him, and yet wherever he went, chains broke, blind eyes opened, fathers forgave sons, mothers found hope, not because of Ezra, but because the same voice that had spoken in the fire now walked through him. One night, he came to a cave where lepers hid from the world. They recoiled when they saw him. One shouted, "Don't come closer, we are unclean." Ezra knelt anyway, and for the first time, someone touched them, not with pity, but with honor. He washed their feet, held their faces, and whispered, "You were not forgotten." They wept, not because their skin changed, but because their souls remembered what it felt like to be seen. The warrior who once cried for deliverance now delivered others, not by the sword, but by the Spirit. But the enemy had not forgotten. In the shadows, a darkness stirred. The one who had sought Ezra's death before was rising again, this time not with weapons, but with doubt. It started small. A woman's son died in a village after Ezra prayed. She screamed, "Why didn't your God save him?" Ezra had no answer. Then a town refused him entry. "We want miracles, not messages," they said. He wept outside their gates, and then, alone under a fig tree, he whispered, "God, are you still with me?" The sky was silent, but in his heart a pulse remained. He remembered the fire, the whisper, the weight of divine presence. And though no voice came that night, he stood again. Because faith isn't hearing. Faith is remembering what you heard when the silence returns. Soon, rumors spread of an army greater than the last, thousands upon thousands rising under a king who worshipped no god but war. Ezra heard the reports and felt fear crawl into his chest. But then he remembered. He was not chosen to defeat armies. He was chosen to remind the world who fights for them. So he walked toward the enemy again, alone. But this time, he did not raise a sword. He raised his hands, and when they laughed, he worshipped. When they mocked, he prayed. And when the first arrow flew, it froze in midair. The army stilled. Every horse, every man, every sword, held by an invisible force. And then a light, not blinding, but revealing. It showed them their hatred, their pride, their pain. It stripped them not of armor, but of excuses. And the ground beneath Ezra glowed like sapphire. A voice deep and full echoed across the valley, "This is my son. I chose him not to conquer, but to testify." And they fell, not to death, but to repentance. Thousands wept that day, not because they were defeated, but because they were seen by a God they never knew could see them. Ezra did not return to glory. He did not build a temple. He disappeared again into silence. But wherever hearts broke, a whisper followed, "Stand, and I will do the rest." And people stood. That was the true miracle, not fire, not signs, but a soul shattered, choosing to rise. Years passed, not in the way most remember them, with calendar pages or birthdays or cities built, but in the quiet between miracles, in the decades where no one hears the thunder, but the ground still remembers the quake. Ezra, the warrior who once stood alone, had vanished. Some say he was taken. Others say he died a forgotten death in a nameless village. But the truth was more sacred. He had become the story, not the man in it. The fire that once engulfed him had not gone out. It had spread. To those who had once followed him at a distance, to those whose chains he broke in silence, to the lepers he had touched, to the mothers who once mourned and now ministered. The voice that once whispered, "Stand, and I will do the rest," now lived in hundreds, then thousands, of lives that refused to bow to fear. They didn't carry swords. They carried mercy. They didn't wear armor. They wore humility. They didn't build kingdoms. They rebuilt ruins of broken homes and shattered hearts. But not everyone celebrated. A new empire rose, one built on control disguised as worship, on gold masked as glory, on power draped in robes. They called themselves righteous. They wore the name of God on their tongues, but held stones in their hands. When word spread that Ezra's flame had lit others, that his message had become a movement, they panicked, because nothing scares an empire more than the people remembering they don't need it to be free. One cold morning, in a forgotten alley near the outer court of a sacred temple, a girl no older than 15 stood before the council. She had healed a blind man by touching his eyes and whispering the name Ezra had once spoken in secret. They screamed, "Blasphemy!" She replied, "I only repeated what I heard in the fire." They dragged her into the streets. Stones were raised, but a man stepped between them. Not a warrior, a carpenter. He knelt beside the girl and looked at her as Ezra once did. "I see you," he said. "You were never alone." He stood, faced the council, and said nothing, just like Ezra did, because sometimes silence is louder than screams. The crowd scattered, not from fear, but from recognition. They had seen that look before, on another face, in another fire. Ezra's name faded from scrolls, but his legacy could not be erased, because it wasn't written in ink. It was written in blood, in tears, in the silent victories of those who stood when it would have been easier to bow. The warrior had not died. He had multiplied. Far across the desert, an old man sat by a fire, his eyes dim, his hands scarred. He listened as a young traveler spoke of strange stories he'd heard, of a man who faced an army alone, of fire that whispered, of people who rose from ashes without explanation. The old man smiled. "I heard of him," the traveler said. "They say he vanished, that he failed to build anything lasting." The old man chuckled, and for a moment, his voice didn't sound old at all. He looked at the fire and whispered, "Sometimes the greatest temples are the ones built in silence, not of stone, but of surrender." The traveler squinted. "Did you know him?" The old man stood, painfully, but with purpose. "No," he said, "I was him." And then he walked into the desert. No crowd, no farewell, only the wind and the fire still burning, because that's how God moves, not always with thunder, sometimes with one man, one woman, one voice, one flame that refuses to die, even when the world forgets the name of the one who carried it. Ezra was never chosen because he was strong. He was chosen because he said yes. And now the only question left is this: will you